Hello again, TTRPGers, and those who love Fabula Ultima. Today, I am over the moon because we are going to start on our video series about creating monsters and NPCs. And this all came from a post I just recently put out about a couple of weeks ago, and I gave you plenty of time to vote in on where to start. And I had two options. I had starting with the foundations on the Core Rulebook, or going into the newly excited and soon to be out Bestiary that was just recently kickstarted. And I was actually kind of surprised that almost overwhelmingly you decided to go with the Core Rulebook. And I started to think more about that, and it seems sensible. We want to start at a foundational level. You want to understand why these monsters are stat blocked this way, what options there are, and I'm excited to introduce you to that. That's why in this session of Fabula Ultima, we're starting video 1 about how to design NPCs and monsters. Let's check it out. Now, before we get started, I think it's always important for me to take a moment and give a shout out and spotlight to all of you who keep coming back to my channel, supporting my videos, and subscribing to my channel. I'm now over 300 subscribers, which to me, I don't want to use the word overwhelming. I want to say it's an honor because I started this channel because when I was getting into Fabula Ultima, like many other TTRPGs, I tried to find stuff up on YouTube or whatever I could. And while there was some spotlights or some recommendations to try the game, there wasn't a very well produced or long form explanation of how to enjoy this game, how to learn more about this game. And I want this to be my goal. So, as I said before, I thank you for giving me your time, and I thank you for subscribing to my channel. And if you're new to my videos, and if you're new to my channel, check me out, check out other videos. I do my very best to help you want to play this game. And if you're already enjoying it, maybe learning a bit more, because I know every time I do these videos, I learn a bit more, and I'm happy to have this community where we can grow together and continue to enjoy this game. So thank you once again, and let's get going with the video where we start talking about monsters. Now, before we start looking at stat blocks or trying to build some mega monster, I think it's important we start from the ground level and we move up, as that's the goal in all my videos, to help people new to this game or just trying to give some entry-level people that are already playing it some idea and understanding how to improve. And I took a lot of thought into this, and I feel like this will be best conveyed in multiple videos because while it's easy to learn and practice, there is a lot of suggestions that I think in partition videos will help you understand and use them as building blocks. And I don't want any long form videos that go to 3 hours and you just lose the grip and the point of what I'm trying to achieve. So with that being said, in this video today, we're going to go into the topics of basically understanding the ranks of monsters, also known as NPCs. I'll be using that word interchangeably. Then we will look at how species contribute to this. Then we'll look at a stat block of a monster. And then I'm going to show you how to make a soldier rank monster, which is the lowest form and easy to understand. And then we'll start evolving from there. Now, as we kick off the topics of these videos, we're going to start with creature ranks. And creature ranks are essentially a ranking difficulty system for the adversaries and monsters that you put against the player characters. And among those ranks, there are 3 of them. We first have the soldier rank, which is going to be the core focus of most of the video today and is the foundational building block on pretty much anything in Fabula Ultima. It's also worth noting that in the Core Rulebook Bestiary, all monsters in the stat blocks are soldier rank. Then, for the second rank, we have the elite. Then followed up with that, we have the champion rank. Okay. I went ahead and changed my setup a little bit because I want it to be a little more free-flowing as I talk to you, and I continue to reference the stat blocks and the references of the core rulebook here on the left. And overall, I just wanted to have a better setup because when I first started in the video, I kind of indexed an order of operations of what we're going to go over, and I talked about putting a stat block to show later on. But I felt now that I have this set up, it will be better to have the stat block for you to view while we go through the references of creature rank. So I'm going to go ahead and put up a monster from the bestiary, the Caterpillar, which shows to be a level 5 beast. And before we go any further in depth on the creature ranks, and I don't want to make it convoluted by having levels and ranks and all that stuff. I want you to understand that when it comes to Fabula Ultima, just like when you start a character for the first time, you start at level 5. In Fabula Ultima's monsters, they are also the lowest rank at level 5. So basically, they do not have any lower level monsters. But as they get more, they get increased in level, they normally put them in multiples of 5. So basically, there's a level 5 monster, and then they go into level 10, then 15, then 20, then etc. And basically, as your characters level up, they're kind of in the middle progression of those multiples of 5. So basically, if you went from you're level 8, you could start fighting level 10 monsters and also level 5. And the 5 monsters would obviously be less difficult, but the 10 would be a little more challenging. But we're not going to get into all of that in this video. I just want you to understand the progress of it. So that being said, we're going to go back into the creature ranks and understanding what they are. So when defining soldier rank, it shows over here in the core rulebook that a soldier rank foe is roughly on par with a player character of its level. And I'm only going to use this reference once. We're using the Caterpillar as a level 5 beast, and all player characters are level 5. I'm not going to keep injecting that, but that's what I want you to understand when we're continuing this. However, when it comes to a 1-to-1 ratio of a player character versus the monster of equal level, they're going to exchange back and forth and pretty much go toe-to-toe in their exchanges of attacks and effects and all that. But when it comes down to it, in most cases, the player character is going to be the victor. However, when it comes to actually orchestrating a conflict battle that is based around soldier rank monsters, there's a fantastic chart here in the core rulebook that kind of gives you a idea of how to rate the challenge in this scenario. So that is defined here by having 3 challenge levels. There's an easy battle, a normal battle, and a hard battle. And it says here the easy battle is defined by equal to the number of characters minus 1 as far as the monsters. So if you had 4 player characters on the battlefield, you would then have 3 monsters, and the player characters would be pretty quickly victorious in this because they have the numbers game, they have their abilities, and it would overall go by pretty quickly. Then you would go into a normal battle to make it a little more difficult, and that's basically equaling the playing field. You have equal level monsters to equal level player characters. And in this scenario, we had 4 player characters, be 4 monsters. And the back and forth between in the fight, the player characters will still more than likely win, unless you just have some really bad dice rolls go against your player characters. They are going to take some damage in some significant areas, maybe inherit some conditions that are going to have to focus some inventory points on to clear, or some some mind points put into spells to clear. That's going to be a very normal situation in a normal battle. Then, as we go into a hard battle, you take the equal number of player characters plus 1 to the number of monsters. So now we have that 4 player characters. We're going to up it up to 5 monsters, and things start going in favor of the monsters. Now, when it comes down to it, it's still going to be a challenge for these players, but keep in mind, Fabula Ultimate, they have Fabula points, they have all these other things to succeed. Things have to go pretty down quickly against them in favor, and it's not in the average that normally happens a lot of times. But when it comes to just having equal level monsters, and then they are the lesser of population against the monsters, they are going to have a challenge. But in this, like I said, we added 1 monster to make it hard. You don't want to keep just adding one extra monster to try to make it a harder challenge for your player characters. That is what is brilliant in the ranking system of Fabula Ultima, because as it sets down here, to spice things up, soldiers can be strengthened into elites and champions, and we're going to go more in depth of how that is achieved. Now we take these soldiers and start making them elite. And this is where it gets fun, in my opinion, as far as making challenges, because looks always can be deceiving. And I normally, when build the monsters, if it's going to be an elite version of a Caterpillar or something like that, I will try to, if I'm drawing the monster or I'm using Aspirite or whatever the visual, I try to make them look a little different to signify a difference of ranking. But you guys do it however you want to do it. A lot of people play the game by theater of mind. I use it by Foundry and have a visual kind of battlefield like the traditional JRPGs. But go to whatever flow you want, but make it definitive that whatever the monster is, if it's like part of the same flock or whatever, a swarm or whatever, make sure to define that this monster looks a little more powerful. But that being said, we're going to go into looking at creating elite. The elite creatures count as 2 soldiers of the same level. So what that means is, instead of having, as it's clearly stated, let's say you have a fight with those 4 player characters, right? And then we have 2 soldiers of the Caterpillars. What you do is you take 2 of those to equal 1 elite. So basically the total count is changing to 1 entity, but their stat block and a lot of things are changing on this. So what you do, as you take 2 of the soldiers of the same level, you then want to turn the soldier into elite to do the following. You take the total monster's hit points and double the creature's maximum hit points. This is why I wanted to have the reference of the stat block. So right here, you'll see hit points on the Caterpillar here as it's 60. You would immediately double that to 120 to make it an elite. Then we go back to reference here. The skills, the creature gains 1 skill of your choice. This may be an NPC skill. This is see page 306, or a skill taken from the character class. And this is where you can start making them super unique and give them all kinds of crazy skills that the players will not expect. But right now, if you look at the Caterpillar at the soldier rank here, it has basic attacks, but it doesn't have any other skills. It has what's called a special rule, which, if I'm going to scroll down just a bit, says roll up. When the Caterpillar performs the guard action, it gains immunity to physical damage until the start of the next turn. That's a special thing just with the stat block of a special rule. But if you made it elite, you would go through a list of skill options. And I'm not going through that until we do an actual elite build, but you would give them an extra skill that goes beyond the stat block of the monster, of a soldier-based monster. Then you would go to turns. So if it's deemed an elite, instead, every soldier gets 1 turn per round. So in combat in Fabula Ultima, you basically have your allies versus the monsters. And it doesn't matter who starts the initiative, whatever. Whoever acts first, it's then going to go to the other side. And one monster is going to go, one is going to act on the other. So if it's the players, they start, they're going to do something, then it's going to be the monsters, then back to the players, then back to the monsters. However, what happens here with an elite is a elite monster gets to have 2 turns per round. So that creature is going to act twice before a round is over. And that starts adding complexities to the player characters having to deal with this more powerful monster. Then we have initiative right here. It says the creature increases their initiative score by 2 points. If we look over here on the initiative score of this monster here, it's an initiative of 7, so it would make it initiative 9. We have not gone into the complexities of combat and initiative and all that. I will do a video, but essentially to get an initiative success, the allies have to do a group check. Just like any other group check, you have a leader, and you try to have their roll beat the initiative level of the monster, whoever's the highest on the battlefield. And right now it would be an initiative 9. Someone would have to roll a 9 or better for the allies to go first. So it's pretty simple, but I wanted to clarify because we haven't really gone into those rule sets. And yeah, that's basically how you turn a 2 soldiers into 1 elite. And basically you can start feeling out how much of a threat this is with your players. Because like I said, in Fabula Ultima, it's a template for success of building fun conflicts. But also, it is not capable of understanding all the min-maxing your player characters can do with the characters multi-classing. That's kind of the fun of you improving and building off of that. And for some people, I think that was a little bit of an off-putting to them being new to Fabula Ultimate, and that is why the success of the Bestiary is coming out, because they're putting a lot of templates to help new people understand and then allow them to build as we are showing out in these videos. But that being said, that's how you do an elite from a soldier. You just do this small list of additions, and you could make 2 elites and just have 2 monsters on there that are basically doing 4 turns around, basically 2 on each. you could have 1 elite and 2 more soldiers. You get really creative on how you want to do it. But what's important is you're not having people have to worry about there being 8 monsters on the battlefield to make this more complex and make this more of a harder conflict. So now we've established the elite, we're going to see how to build a champion. All right, we've been through rank 1 soldier, rank 2 elite, and now we start really hitting with a pack of punches when you make a champion from the source of soldiers. Just like when you're building elite, a volume number of soldiers is the definitive variable of how to achieve this. And if you look over here in creating a champion, it says champion creatures can replace any number of soldiers of the same level. If you want to turn a soldier into a champion, do the following. So for reference, we're going to take this caterpillar that's level 5 soldier. We're going to take 4 of them to make a 4 rank champion. And so this is what the formula is we're going to follow. So hit points. Hit points multiply the creature's maximum hit points by the number of soldiers they are replacing. So we go back to the character sheet, and I know I can't physically change the reference, but we have the hit points of 60 for 1 caterpillar. Since it's a rank 4 champion, we're going to take that 4 and multiply it by 60 by 4, and it's going to have 240 hit points. This is a beefy caterpillar. Or maybe if you want to reword it, maybe it's like, you know, the den mother of a caterpillar, or whatever you want to define it, but that being more of like a boss level type of setup. But we have more to build onto that as far as complexities and bosses here in a moment. But when we go back from establishing the hit points, we then have mind points. We double the mind points of the creature. That's something that wasn't a part of the elite. We then look at the amount of mind points the caterpillar has. It now goes to 90 mind points. So it's going to have a larger mind pool to do other things with skills and all of that. When we look at that, that's where we go to the skills. It says the creature gains a number of additional skills of choice equal to the number of soldiers it placed. These may be NPC skills or skills taken from another class. Now, remember, when we did the elite, it was just 1 skill increase. You're now getting 4 skills added on. And this goes from like, yeah, it can be things that are in the Bestiary, which we will go over here in a video soon. But at the same time, though, you can also take class ability skills that we've gone over in character creation. Like you can get the Weapon Master skill Breach, that was able to, if successful attack, instead of doing damage, it destroys a piece of armor or a piece of like a shield. You can start really making this monster definitive to how impactful you want to be based on the skills you're giving it. And that's where it starts to get really cool. Then we have turns. Just like the elite, they got 1 extra turn per round. This one, the champion of rank 4 champion, during conflict scenes, a champion performs a number of turns per round equal to the number of soldiers they are replacing. So that means each round, this creature, this rank 4 champion, it's level 5, but it's a rank 4 champion at level 5. It gets 4 turns per round. It has, in which that it can use any of its skills or attacks or whatever that they have. This thing goes from this little caterpillar, and then you start bulking them up with this ranking system, really packs a punch and can become a threat by just being 1. You now have the 4-player characters we used in reference against the soldiers earlier. You're now putting them against a 4-rank champion. Now, ratio, it's still 4-4. But it's going to have a little more complexity because they're getting the actions, they're getting all these extra skills. It's going to be more impactful and a challenge than just having 4 of the same caterpillar doing their thing. And that's when you can start getting really creative with your monsters. But we're not done there when it comes to the champion. Also, we have the initiative increase the score by 1 for every soldier. So just as we looked earlier at the caterpillar when we went up by 2 on the elite, a total of 4 would be at initiative. So it's going to have an initiative 11. So that's a much higher roll that the player is going to have to achieve to start the rounds in their favor. But as I've gotten excited in explaining what champions can do, it says down here, just to recap, it says, remember, while elites and champions can perform more than 1 turn per round, they must still do while alternating with the player character. So that's important to know. They don't get 4 turns back to back to back to back. They are just extending the round with multiple alternating turns. So keep in mind of that, and it's very important to understand that, because otherwise you're going to obliterate your players, giving the monster ability to hit 4 times in a row or whatever they're going to cast or do. But when it comes down to everything, you have these soldier ranks, you have these elite ranks, and you have these champion ranks. As you can see, every time we go higher, it gets a little more threatening, it gets a little more impactful, and then it starts to get really nasty with the champions. That is not done in its threat, because no matter the rank, you can also dub them a villain. And that is another category that makes these monsters more impactful. And you don't want to do that often. They're designed for the climactic fights that you would have in any JRPG. And we'll go over the villain edition at a later time. But it basically gives them more capabilities on top of the stats that they already have. So we've gone through creature ranks. We've seen how to build up from our little caterpillar into from a soldier rank all the way to a rank 4 champion, this giant caterpillar that would be no doubt a threat to our player characters. It's time to go away from the ranks, and we're going to start looking at species that are options to build monsters from. All right, we're going to jump into species now, and it's another foundational building block when it comes to understanding and creating monsters or NPCs in Fabula Ultima. And in Fabula Ultima, there are 8 species to choose from, and you must select a species no matter what when building a new character, or excuse me, new creature. And we're going to go over the list here of species, all 8 of them, and show what makes them different and has uniqueness to them. But it's a fun rollover to go through, so it really can start helping get your creative juices on what might be a new monster you want to try. So when we look over here on the NPC species, we're going to start with the species of beast. We're going to look here at starting skills here. On the pages for each species, they have an amount of starting skills, and we're going to go into that on an actual build here a little bit later. But this is what allows you to give them special abilities. Like I said in earlier in the video, you might be able to take skills from different classes. Then there's also a list of skills that come innately from the bestiary you can add in as well, and it goes from anything from special attacks or abilities to having resistances to certain affinities to having a higher initiative, higher accuracy. Those all require skill sacrifices or skill expenditures. But I don't want to go too far into that. We're going to just focus on the species. So for beasts are feral creatures with an animal intelligence. While their shape is sometimes twisted by magic, they generally do not use spells. Example, giant rat, sun bear, warrior ant are species examples. Now, on the rules for these species, it says beasts cannot acquire the use equipment skill. So this is what's going back here with starting skills. If you go through a choice of them, they cannot use the use equipment skill, meaning they're not allowed to wear armor, they're not allowed to use weapons and stuff like that. They are natural attacks that are built, and they do not get to use stat blocks of different items. That's the one caveat when it comes to species. Anything else is free reign on the table going through skills. Then we're going to go over to the construct, which you notice their starting skills here is 2. So they don't have as much of a high range as options as a beast, but there's a reason for it. It says constructs are artificial beings animated by the power of souls, often crafted by alchemists, mages, or wow, my hand just jumped all over there. By mages or scientists. So what that means is that they're a unique species in this, and it has an example: gargoyle, golem, magitech soldier. Well, this is why the skills are lower. If you look at their rules, it's not so much a limitation like beasts have. they have constructs are immune to poison damage, resistant to earth damage, and immune to poison, the condition. So immediately, just picking a construct, they have all of these innately added onto their character stat block, and that's why they have a starting skill less than beasts. Then we're going to go down over here to demon. As you look this, I love this adorable imp. I love the artwork here in the Fabula Ultima Core Rulebook. If I haven't touted it enough, there's just such a wonderful charm in everything they put in any of their artwork, and I continue to give it mad respect. And actually, in my backdrop I'm using here is also from the Bestiary as well. I believe, yes, it came from the Bestiary. I love this image. Tout out to it. Whoever drew this, I wish I had the reference in front of me, but it really stood out to me, and I love it, and I can't wait to look more into the Bestiary. But back to the point. Demon has a starting skill of 3. Demons are incarnations of legends and beliefs. Despite possessing a body, they are not truly alive. Some may even reincarnate when slain. And it says examples from demons: boogeymans, devils, and imps. Now, the rules to these species are demons are resistant to 2 damages types of your choice. So they already have a resistance to 2 of your choice. You get to apply it no matter what, of any affinity, all the way from air to dark magic. Just take 2, and that is why they have a starting skill of 3. They get 1 more skill versus constructs, because you notice constructs have an immunity along with some resistances and a conditional immunity. So I hope you're starting to see the differentials here. Then the 4th we have is Elemental, and its starting skills are 2, and it says elementals are tangible manifestations of the great forces of nature. Some of them are sentient, but many are devoid of thought. And it says examples: nymph, phoenix, titan. Now, the rules that come to this is elementals are immune to poison damage, immune to a second damage type of your choice, and that can include physical. It doesn't say you can't include it, and they're immune to the poison condition. So already there, elementals really pack a punch when you want to put them in, and even at level 5, as they start, they get this additions before you even have to consider what skills. Some other monsters would have to put extra skill points to be immune to something, or just to achieve that, and this is innate for an elemental. So that's the first 4 of the species, and we're going to go into the next 4. In the final 4 of the species, we actually have the humanoid, the monster, the plant, and the undead. And starting at the top with the humanoid, we see that they have a starting skills of 3. And I think in most cases of almost every single TTRPG, humanoids are your most common base of building block of a monster, even if you're not really monster, NPC, adversary, whatever you want to call it. But the humanoid this is a broad category, a catch-all term for intelligent creatures who tend to live in communities and rely on tools and equipment. Examples would be a bandit, a kobold, an ogre, and you can really go across the spectrum on how you define that. And in the rules here, humanoids always gain use equipment skill for free, which is pretty great. They can wear armor, they can use weapons that you just can equip them from. You can put in basic weaponry or give them rare sample items in the Core Rulebook or other of the atlases. It really makes them strong by just putting that stuff on them and putting weapons in their hands. And usually is probably one of the more common things you'll probably use in games. I guess it really depends on the definement of your setting. But then we go to monster. And we keep using the term monster as a general term, and that's why times I switch to NPCs and adversaries. But monsters, I would say, are a definitive thing outside, of course, any of these other species. But it shows here monsters have starting skills of 4. Monsters are magical beasts, generally quite intelligent and gifted with supernatural powers. Their features are often bizarre. Examples: a basilisk, a dragon, a mimic. Monsters have no special rules, so they have no limitations, but they have no true starting boons either. And that's why they really get very similar to beasts, get to start with 4 skills of your choosing. And that really makes it a fun way to just determine what the monster is, whether you want to say, maybe like a werewolf, or like it says, a mimic or something like that. You can really give it skills to base the flavor of what you're trying to achieve. Then on number 7 here, we have plant, the species of plant. They have starting skills of 3. Far from being typical vegetation, these plants have evolved into dangerous predators due to mutation or magical influence. Examples say an Auron, a dragon tap, or a treant. I'd say a lot of times people would understand what to define a plant-based creature if you've played any past TTRPGs that would fall into these examples. But their rules, plants are immune to dazed, shaken, and enraged. So half the conditions that you would inflict on them already, that they do nothing to them. You cannot do anything. But it does say they're vulnerable to one of the options: air, bolt, fire, ice damage. So they have a good skill set selection, and they have a phenomenal start of basically immunities to being brought down condition-wise. But they also have a vulnerability that can be exploited pretty quickly. Now, of course, I would say in most cases, players are going to almost always cast fire first on plants. And that's why I like you have a choice here. You don't have to give them that out immediately. But at the same time, it might encourage them, or maybe discourage them to cast different type of spells when they find out that they're not vulnerable to fire. But that's part of the fun of revealing what their affinities are as they kind of nick at the monster in combat. Then, the final of the 8, we have Undead. And these guys are a little bulkier here. They have 2 starting skills. But it says Undead may be corpses reanimated through magic or restless spirits unable to peacefully return to the stream of souls that forms creation. Examples would be mummy, skeleton, zombie. Now, the rules here you can see are a little more extensive. Undead are immune to dark and poison damage, immune to being poisoned in a condition, but vulnerable to light. So already they are exploited. In most cases, if there's undead, you're already going to have to deal with that. But on additional on the rules here, it says when an effect such as an arcanum or a potion or spell would cause an undead creature to recover hit points, whoever controls that effect may instead have the undead lose half as many hit points. So I like this because there's some I don't want to say spoilers, but there is certain Final Fantasy situations where you fight undead. You can simply just use the item Phoenix Down, which would normally bring people to life, would immediately defeat an undead, even bosses at some levels. But also being able to just use the inventory of a potion. You could use the potion inventory points on the undead, and I think it's 50 you recover from. Maybe it's 40, but either way, that's just a quick half damage or half that total be damage on undead. So if you're low on mind points or don't have something, maybe you're not as much of a martial character or a range capable character, you should build that in some manner. But just in case you're limited, you could go to your inventory points and start heaving those things at undead and still do damage. And I like that little bit of vulnerability and creativity to these species, because with the fact that they're already undead to 2 damage types and a condition, that's pretty heavy hitting for even just a level 5 soldier to deal with. So, yeah, that is species. We went through all 8. You understand what they are, how you inject, or what they are importance to creating a monster. And since we've gone over the ranks, we've gone over the species, I'm going to go back over to a character block, and we're going to go through its entirety now. And then I'm going to just try to create a monster from scratch based on everything we've gone over. All right, we've got the full stat block of the Caterpillar now right above me in the top right of the screen, and to the left is the reference of currently on the species. And what we're going to do is break down the Caterpillar stat block as a whole so you understand just majority of stat blocks of how they work and how this Caterpillar became to be. So as we start over at the Caterpillar, we see that, it's its name, Caterpillar. We see that it's level 5, and as I said, they all start, this lowest level is level 5, and they usually go in level increments of 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. And also remember that in the core rulebook Bestiary, all monsters are soldiers. Anything that's elite, anything that is a champion, is a building scenario off of the soldier level. So just keep that in mind. We see here that its species is a beast. So we will look over back to the left on the species side here, and we see that it's a beast. And to see over here the certain special rules, there is starting skills of 4, and beasts cannot acquire the use equipment skill. Those are the 2 things you must keep in mind on this character sheet or the NPC sheet of the Caterpillar. Keep in mind where you have 4 skills. We'll go into that here in a minute. That's the more at the end in-depth breakdown of why this character is built the way this creature is built the way it is. So as we look back under the name of the Caterpillar, we see a small description that says a large centipede that can roll itself into a ball to fend off attacks, only to spring up and bite afterwards. This is giving you some flair of how to explain what they do in combat and how, just how to describe the flow of combat when they make attacks and do things. It's just a guideline. You can be more creative with it, but also if you're creating something from scratch, you have your free reign to do whatever you want. But make sure to give it a little bit of flair if you're actually designing your own stat blocks for reference for other people. Then below, we have typical traits, which you will find this in every monster. Typical traits show just as how they act, their mannerisms. Mostly, I would say, in the design of out of combat, but you could use this in combat if you wanted and just be creative with it. Looking at this one, the typical traits are heavy, resilient, slow, territorial. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. Let's say the player characters are dungeon delving in this Caterpillar den, and they don't really know much about them. And they finally get into this core area, this nursery, or maybe whatever the case. There's a bunch of, it's a big den full of these large rolled up objects. They don't really know what it is. And they get close and then they try to move it, and it doesn't really do anything. And then they finally try to hit it. And they notice there's some resistance to it, maybe even a clang, but it's enough to wake the Caterpillar up. And Caterpillars are very territorial. So that makes the point where they're pretty much imposed to attack. So if I say, okay, one wakes up and maybe it makes a shriek and like 20 more form out of these balls, more than likely the characters might want to try to run. So I would make some sort of clock to escape the Caterpillar den. And basically it would be opposing checks between the Caterpillars and the player characters. But because the player characters are running and there's no other scenarios that have been left through Fabula points or whatever, I'm going to consider the fact that the Caterpillar has the slow trait. So more than likely, if we're doing opposing checks of speed, I'm going to make it where the Caterpillars have like a -2 to the opposing check because they do not have the capability of keeping up with the players. So that's just a scenario to consider. That was just off the fly in my head and just kind of dictating as we go. Use your imagination and let them use it to describe your events as a GM. And also, if the players decide to study the monsters, let them take advantage of these traits if it benefits them when they're doing delving. That's the fun of this game. But once we get through all this kind of the abstract, we're going to go to the actual mechanics. And on this, we see the attributes. We're familiar with this from my attributes video. I've done multiple character building videos and now involving this. And just like when building a character, they have the same 4 core stat blocks. They have, or the attributes. They have Dex, Insight, Might, Willpower. And just like when you're selecting them for a character, you have these options to go with as well. We'll go ahead and just bring up the Designing NPCs page real quick. And you see down below, distribute one of the following arrays among the NPC attributes. We have the Jack of all trades, which is all 8s across. Then there's standard, which is a D10, 2 D8s, and a D6. There's specialized, which is 2 D10s and 2 D6s. But something monsters have that player characters do not in their build is super specialized, which is a D12, a D8, and a D6 and D6, because this gives them a little bit of extra punch to combat all the other unique things that might come out of player characters and the synergies they build. But in this, we look at the Caterpillar. You notice that there is a D10, there's a D8, a D8, and a D6. So going back to it, we are looking at the standard layout. So that's what they chose on it to make the stat block sensible for it. And like I said, if you want to reskin this or inject a different style, that's your focus. You can do that. You're not told you can't. That's just how it made it to be in this and kind of design its attack styles and all that. So now knowing their attributes, we're going to look at their hit points. And if we look back at the design sheet, go back one page here. And getting hit points. We're going to kind of jump around here because it's not matching the level I'm going down. But when I build a character from scratch, we will use this from start to finish. But down here, it says maximum HP is equal to twice the NPC's level plus 5 times the NPC's base night die. So we go back to the caterpillar here. And we look at, first of all, its level. It's 5. So it's twice the level. So that's 10. That's the first part of the formula. And then we have the might score times 5, which their might is 10 times 5 is 50. So looking back at that formula, as I said, that twice the NPC's level, that's 10, plus 5 times the NPC's base might die size is 50. That gets us, that's 60 on the caterpillar. To the right here is 30. That's their crisis score, just like any of the player characters. Once they hit half of the hit points, they hit a crisis level, which a lot of times for monsters will allow you to get new actions and certain skills based on the fact that they're in crisis, or maybe limitations. Something, if a monster has the flight, if once they hit crisis, they lose their flight. All kinds of stuff like that can be applied. Then to the right, we have MP, which is mind points, and it's 45 on the value here. To get a MP formula for the NPCs, maximum MP is equal to the NPC's level, which is 5, plus 5 times the base's NPC base willpower. So on the caterpillar, it's a D8. So we have a D8 there, and then it's so times 5 is 40. And then plus its level, which is 5. So that's a total of 45 if you look at that formula. Then we have initiative, which INIT means initiative of a 7. So looking at the initiative, it says up here, initiative is equal to the base dexterity die size, which for the caterpillar is 8, plus the base insight die, which is 6, which is a total of 14, divided by 2, which means divided by 2, 14 divided by 2 is a 7. And it says, remember to apply penalties due to armor. Well, this is a beast. They can't wear any equipment or anything like that, so that's not anything we have to worry about. So, once we've got through here, we're going to ignore this part really quick, and then you'll notice the RSs and the VUs here. This right here are the extra, it's on the monster stat block. These are calculating for extra defensive skills, magic defensive skills, and then these are the affinities, just like you have with the player character. The little dagger silhouette is a physical, the little gust of wind is air, the little lightning bolt's bolt, this little demonic head is dark damage, this rock here is earth, flame is fire, the little ice or little snowflake is ice damage, this little radiant ball right here is light damage, and then the skull and bones is poison. So on the stat block here, if they're all just the little silhouettes, that means there's no application of, it's neutral. Any damage of that type's done to them, there's nothing lesser, nothing greater that happens to them. But if you look over here, you see the RSs. This means resistance. This is half any damage done by dark damage or earth damage on this creature is halved. That's what resistance does. It cuts it in half. But then you look over here to the right, you have the VUs on the flame and the ice, and that means vulnerable. So if you apply damage of fire or ice to it, it's going to do double the damage that is put onto the creature from whatever the attack is. So it's worth keeping in mind what that means when you're looking at your characters or designing or even using a stat block to remember what they are, because in Fabula Ultima, if they use an attack and it does anything extra to the affinity, it is up to you to tell them that. That's part of your obligation as a GM. You're not coy and saying, it does more damage, does less. Like you just straight up say they are resistant to this attack. They are vulnerable to this attack. There's also another affinity application called absorption. If they are are able to absorb an attack, they actually gain hit points based off of the affinity of damage done. But you got to be careful whenever you're considering building these monsters. But as I said, to the left here, we have defense +2, magic defense +1. This is gained by a skill. And we're going to go back to that here in a minute, because I want to calculate all the skills that are on the beast here. But just keep in mind, that's a skill-based thing. You'll also notice in the beast layout, they're on the species list we were looking at earlier. Go back to that. If you notice here, there's no actually, they don't have any immunities like the constructor or anything like that. They don't have anything other than the fact that they cannot use the use equipment skill. So why do they have resistances and vulnerabilities? Well, that the resistances are also obtained by one of their starting skills. So I'm wanting to explain to that. But vulnerabilities, for every vulnerability you give to a monster, you gain an extra skill point that you can apply to the monster. Now, I will say this. I evaluated this monster prior multiple times, and I actually went to some of my friends and people that I didn't even know on the Fabula Ultima Discord, and through this monster stat block, because when it comes to the expenditure of the skills that they have based on taking vulnerabilities to gain extra skills, the math doesn't math the way I would calculate this, and I'm not trying to convolute it, but in the core rulebook, it often says you can make a monster and give them extra vulnerabilities to flare the situation and not have to spend all of their skills just to achieve. Now, a lot of the min-maxers would roll their eyes at this, but I'm also one that likes to just set these vulnerabilities by design. So we're going to do the math on here in a minute. I'm just explaining to you why that they have vulnerabilities, why they have resistances when the species doesn't show that in the actual species list. So down below, we have then the basic attacks, which these are things you can come up with. You can have as many basic attacks if you want. You can make them range, you can make them melee, and make sure they meet certain combinations. It's usually dex plus might for melee attacks and all that stuff. It really varies, and there's a list to review on that, but I'm not going to jump into that. And then you see damage type on basic attacks. You can choose the damage type. It doesn't have to be any type of specialty. Just know you can do physical, you can do poison, you can do whatever on that. But then on here on the mandible slash, it's dex plus might, high roll +5 poison damage, and then the target suffers weak. Just keep that variable in mind. Then we have the ability Cutter Ball, which is dex plus might, high roll +5 and physical damage instead of poison. So those are considered basic attacks. But what you notice on both of these attacks, there's a little bit extra. There's the target suffers the weak on the mandible slash. And then it says, if the caterpillar performed the guard action during its previous turn, this attack deals 5 extra damage. These are special attacks that were added to it through skill points. So that's how he acquired these. And once again, I'm going to build this from ground up to make this more understandable. I just want you to understand why these exist. This is how you find these in these monsters. And then finally, there is the special rule roll-up. When the caterpillar performs a guard action, it gains immunity to physical damage until the start of the next turn, which is pretty crazy because the guard action normally is just resistances to everything. But this is a special ability that is chosen from the skill options. And to be perfectly honest, some of the stuff isn't rules is written as a skill to gain. It often says in the core rulebook, you can do something like that is, it's called a unique action to allow this to happen. You just got to be careful to make sure it's not too ridiculously powerful. But all in all, it required 1 skill point to obtain. So that being said, we have gone through the stat block in its entirety. We've made sense of the attributes, we made sense of the hit points, the initiative, the mind points, and all that. We're going to go back to the starting skills of the beast species, which is 4. So what we're doing here is we're going to pay 1 skill point to get improved defense, and I'll be putting that on as a showcase here. And that means you get defense +2, magic defense +1. So that's one of our starting skills that has been used from the species. Then we have resistances here. There is a skill called damage resistance. You get to choose 2 resistant types, damage resistances of your choice. And then it also has a underline that says if a NPC was vulnerable to a damage, it doesn't get resistance. It just becomes a neutral damage type. But so far, 2 skill points from the species being spent. 1 on the improved defense, 1 on the resistances. Then we have Mandible Slash. Like I said, this is just considered a basic attack once you go up to just the damage. But they're spending an extra skill point to have the special attack on here, which poison damage, well, it says, and the target suffers weak. So every time this attacks, they suffer weak when they hit. So, or the recipient does. So that's 3 of the 4 skill points. Then we go to Cutter Ball. Under the basic attacks here, this is Dex plus Might, high roll +5 physical damage. That's the basic attack of this. Well, if you read beyond here, it says if the Cutter Ball performed the guard action during its previous turn, an attack deals 5 extra damage. This is also a special attack. So that is now 4 points. We've spent all 4 points, starting skill points of the beast. But if you notice here, we have 1 more ability, Roll Up. And it says when the Caterpillar performs a guard action, it gains immunity to physical damage until the start of its next turn. That would require a 5th point. We don't have any points low from the starting skills. So how did we obtain this? Well, as earlier spoken, we have vulnerabilities that were applied to this monster. For every vulnerability, you get 1 skill point in return. So this is where I went and referred to my people at the Fabula Ultima Discord, because I made sense of getting vulnerable to fire damage to have enough points to have the roll-up skill. That's all 5 of 5 skills that I'm seeing on the character sheet achieved. But technically, there was an extra skill point to be used if chosen from the vulnerability of ice. There was some back and forth. A lot of us just came to the conclusion, because it says in the core rulebook, when creating monsters, you should not be forced or expected to spend all your extra skills when obtaining vulnerabilities. And I think that's what was achieved here. So if you see any questionable math in this, in my description, if you've played this game or you see something I didn't, hey, this is part of the community. Step out, show where we may have dropped the ball in this, but I'm not seeing anything on there. And I've went through a few regulations of other people discussing, and a couple of people said, well, maybe because they got immunity to physical damage, that might equal 2 skill points. There's nothing in the core rulebook that I can see that says that, because you can actually expend 1 skill point to just have permanent immunity to physical, but it voices caution in doing that, because that's the most common damage point. But neither here and there. For those who like the math on this, feel free to put your comments in this. But on top of that, I hope I made this very sensible on how this works as far as breaking down this monster stat block based on the starting skills. Because when I read this the first few times, it, as I said, took me some time to understand, but it wasn't until application I've realized how easy this is. And just like all of my videos, when I break stuff down or build stuff up, the time it takes to achieve this is so much less than the time I'm having to explain this. So that being said, that's the stat block of the Caterpillar. And I think we're about wrapped up on that. And the only thing left is to actually do a build. But as I said earlier in the video, I think the length I've achieved and the amount of information to process, the video should be a separate video. And I'm just going to do a separate build up, because I've taken enough time in doing this initial video and I want the videos to make sense. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, and I will see you here on the outro. All right, well, that's the start of my video series when it comes to making NPCs and monsters. And I hope for whatever everything I gave you was articulate and inspired you to start creating. As I did state earlier in my intro that I was going to do a build from scratch, I decided to, as I said at the very end of the showcase, the stat block, I'm going to do that as a separate video because I want that to be separated for you to view specifically for that. And also, to be perfectly honest, I put a lot of time into this video alone, and I just don't want it to be too long because there's much more to cover. There's more things to build off of and inspire when it comes to making monsters and adversaries. So, as always, at the end of the video, I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good night, and I hope you want to play more Fabula Ultima. Can't wait until the next video. I'll see you then.